to Eye on Literature. This is Michael Minassian podcasting from Broward Community College in Broward County, Florida. Today I'll be talking to novelist Christine Kling about her novels and the writing process. She's the author of 4 published novels: Surface Tension, Cross Current, Bitter End, and Wrecker's Key. And they all feature the amateur detective and tugboat captain, Seychelle Sullivan. You might be able to see the books that are lined up. I'm going to scoot out of the way here. Lined up behind us, there are the 4 hardcover versions. And also, interesting, which you can't see, there are some foreign language editions also, and I believe an English edition, you told me. And they have different covers, but interesting to see how the other languages translate the titles and the artwork that's on them as a little bit different. Christine's also working on a standalone novel entitled Faulty Intelligence. She lives on a 33-foot caliber sailboat, the Tailspinner, in a canal just off the New River in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Christine, welcome to today's podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you as a guest. Let's start by talking a little bit about the process of writing fiction. When you sit down to write, do you have a definite idea for your novel?
I usually start out by figuring out what the crime is going to be, the milieu of crime. Of course, when I started this series, I came up with the character, Seychelle, first. She was the very first step in writing this. But after the main character, the next step, after my protagonist, the next step is my antagonist and what the crime is going to be. So I know who the bad guys are, I know what the crime is going to be, but it's getting from there to there that is hard. Right, right.
I've heard a lot of writers say that in order to write a mystery novel or to write a screenplay, for example, that you have to have the ending in mind. Do you know how the novel's going to end?
I have an idea, but I have to say that of my 4 novels, 2 of them have not ended the way that I thought they were going to end it when I started. It changes. Mm-hmm. It veers off and you suddenly get an idea and you think, oh no, I couldn't do that. And then nothing else works. Mm-hmm. You have to do that. And it just turns right when you thought it was going to go left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when I've been talking to the poets here at Broward Community College, we talk a lot about the surprise ending and how it's a surprise not only to the reader, but to the poet himself or herself. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like that might be happening to you as well.
It does.
Right. Well, it does make it less predictable. That's one good thing. Mm-hmm. Do you work with an outline at all?
I've gone back and forth on that because it's been fairly late in my life that I've had my books published. Mm-hmm. So more of my life I've been a reader and a fan of writers. And I've spent many, many times going to readings at bookstores and libraries and colleges. And I'd love to go hear people talk. And the people I admired most always said they did not outline. Mm-hmm. Now, my very first novel, I outlined it. But then I thought, well, all those people who write so well, they don't outline. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to throw it away, and I'm not going to outline this time. And I wrote more pages on my second book and threw them away. Mm-hmm. It was so hard, and I found out, in essence, my first draft became like an outline. And I finally concluded that there are people who outline first and make a really extensive outline. Mm-hmm. And then there are people whose first drafts are sort of outlines, and I mix the two now. I have an outline that goes to about the first third of the book I'm currently writing, and then I started winging it, and then I started outlining the end, and I mix the two right now.
Oh, good. But everything comes together sort of at the end when you...
It does. Right. I start outlining when I get panicked that I don't know what's happening next.
I think we all try to plan a little after the fact, I think. In the first novel, Surface Tension, you introduced the character of Seychelle Sullivan. Tell us a little bit about how did you come up with that particular character? Was it something in your own life that you based it on? Or?
In a way it was, because although I'm teaching at Broward Community College now, in my 20s and my 30s, I was a sort of vagabond sailor.
Mm-hmm.
I was married, and my husband and I sailed all through the South Pacific. We visited Tahiti, the Cook Islands, Rarotonga, Fiji. We eventually came back to California, built another boat. Took us 3 years to build this other boat, and we went down through the Panama Canal and to the Caribbean. So I had all this boating experience.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I was writing articles for the magazines like Sail and Cruising World, and
Right.
I was writing travel articles and working as a freelance journalist. But I really wanted to write fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided when we moved to Florida and I got a master's in creative writing, when I finished the master's program, having written a bunch of short stories, wanted to write a novel, I decided I would make a character who had this boating background. But then I knew I wanted to write series mystery fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And you have this problem with certain characters that there's really not a good reason for them to keep finding dead bodies. You know, what was there? The Angela
A lot of bad luck.
Right. You know, I mean, who would move to Cabot Cove
There's
at
too
this
many
point?
people dying, right?
Yeah. So I wanted somebody who had a good reason. And at the time that I was envisioning this book, it was in the 90s. And Fort Lauderdale was like the murder capital of the
Right,
world.
right.
And so it wasn't that crazy that somebody in Fort Lauderdale would find dead bodies. But then I wanted her job to be boat related, to access my boating background. So I came up with this idea of salvage.
Mm-hmm.
And the salvage is, a salvage tugboat captain is sort of like the AAA on the water. And
Right.
if your boat crashes or it burns or it goes on the reef, then that's when the salvage person shows up. And many times that's when people die also.
Mm-hmm.
So there was sort of a reason for her. I thought this all out in creating this character. And then the other thing that came to play in it was I was a huge fan of the Travis McGee novels.
Right, it's John MacDonald.
Right. John D. MacDonald wrote these wonderful books about this character who lived in Bahia Mar. And so I thought I would be sort of nervy and write this character who was a female in Fort Lauderdale in the salvage business, which is what Travis had been. So that's sort of how Seychelles came to be, those three things: the John D. MacDonald boating background and salvage as a place where she can come upon crime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She's a very interesting character. I like her a lot, and I noticed that she has a lot of relationship issues.
Oh, yes.
What's that all about?
Well, I didn't know how to make a good relationship last for several books.
Mm.
I wanted there to be romantic tension in the books. And so I wanted there to be this character. I didn't want to make him the typical sort of alpha male.
Right.
Because I want her to be a strong female protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
He can't come in and save the day all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to make him somebody that female readers would like and be intrigued by, and female readers usually are attracted to the alpha male. So I was having a lot of fun trying to create this character. He's BJ in the books.
Right.
And BJ is part Samoan, part Japanese, part sort of everything. From Hawaii, a surfer and a sort of new age guy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a lot of fun creating him. But then Seychelles needs to be this woman on her own. She
Right.
can't get married and settle down and go live in the burbs.
Right.
So it's sort of on again, off again, on again, off again.
Mm-hmm.
And then Travis McGee in those books, Travis had a different woman in every single book.
Yeah, exactly.
And I thought when I began the books that I was going to have Seychelles do that. And I was going to see, are we finally in today's world able to have a woman who could do the same thing that Travis did?
Mm-hmm.
And I found out, no, we're not. It still would be considered, that woman would be considered, and I was told this by my editors in New York, that women who have multiple love interests are morally deficient, but it's okay for men.
It's okay for me, right? There's a double standard again.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
So I made her relationship with BJ continue throughout the books, but she just can't quite settle down with him because the books would end, and I don't want them to end.
Yeah. Well, there's still a lot of tension between the two of them. The sexual tension is always there, always present. And thinking to books that I read, mystery fiction, suspense, it's rare that the alpha male, even if he does get involved with a different woman in every book, it's not to settle down. It's I'm passing through, or sometimes it's a relationship that, like this one, I'm thinking of Peter Robinson's Inspector and his co-worker. It changes over time, and it shifts, and it goes back and forth again. So you seem to be working right along in that tradition.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, I have to ask you a kind of personal question, and you don't have to answer this. She doesn't have to answer this. But I find Seychelles to be, she's very tough, and she gets beat up a lot. I noticed that she suffers the same kind of physical pounding that the male detectives and amateur detectives suffer, that she gets punched and hit over the head and shot and thrown overboard. She's tough, but she's also vulnerable. Is that based on you?
Yes, it is. It is. For example, when I was 19 years old, I thought, I want to write a book. I want to write. I'd wanted to be a writer since I was in 7th grade. And I thought the only way to get published was to do something amazing. You had to be sort of ripped from the headlines. And I didn't have enough money to buy a boat and sail around the world. I didn't have enough money to mount an expedition to climb the highest mountain. I lived in Southern California. I did have a bicycle, and they had just opened a new highway down Baja California.
Right.
The Baja Highway had not been paved before. It had just been paved, and previously the only way anybody could get down there was by donkey or something. So I took off on my bicycle and I rode 1,000 miles down the Baja Highway at age 19, camping out. And in Mexico, a woman alone is a target. And I had some, I won't say that I actually had to beat anybody up, but I had some pretty close calls, some pretty serious times when I thought that I was in danger. And I've always done things like that. I like the adrenaline rush of living on the edge. So I've ridden bicycles, I've sailed boats across oceans, always knowing that there's something very exciting about that. So yeah, I have been in situations where I've had to, with all my strength, punch a guy in the face and get punched back.
Right.
And I grew up with a brother, so I started that early.
That's good training. My sister could tell you about that, but we're not going to put her on camera. Let's talk a little bit about your new book, Faulty Intelligence. What would you like to say about that novel?
Oh boy, this one is really being a breech birth. It's, I will be, come July, 2 years on this book, and that's a long time for me. This one is going to be a longer book than anything I've written before. It's a big international thriller. And it has to do with every single book I've written. I've had to take a topic that I find I'm passionate about. The first novel, Surface Tension, had to do with young girls who were really being targeted by sexual predators.
Right.
The second book was on human trafficking of Haitians. And these are things that I'm passionate about. And right now I'm passionate and angry about what my country is doing with the war in Iraq and where we're going and what's happening. So faulty intelligence has been a really common phrase that's been bandied about lately. There were no weapons of mass destruction. It was faulty intelligence. We didn't know about 9/11 happening because of faulty intelligence. It's been blamed on the intelligence community.
Right.
So I decided to create a secret society at a northeastern university that is an Ivy League school that many members of our intelligence agency and even presidents have been members of. And there is a secret sect within that Ivy League secret society that has been manipulating the intelligence service, making it so that indeed our presidents and our makers of decisions have been receiving faulty intelligence because they have been manipulating it so that we can go to war. And this has in fact been going on since before World War II.
Right, right.
So I'm getting into conspiracy theorists and the New World Order people, and I'm having so much fun reading all about Skull and Bones and making all of these really cool stuff. And it's based on a real submarine that disappeared in the Caribbean in World War II. There was a French submarine named Surcouf that took off from Bermuda in February of 1942 and vanished. And in my story, there is proof in that submarine of the existence of this organization. And somebody's trying to find it, and somebody doesn't want them to find it.
Right.
So I've been reading
Basic
about
conflict,
But it's been fun. And I'm planning, when I'm not teaching over the summer, I'm taking off on my little 33-foot sailboat, sailing to the Bahamas in about 2 weeks. And I'm going to anchor out and finish the book. So
good for you.
Hope to finish.
Terrific. Sounds great. That's an interesting topic. It's certainly very relevant and current. And I remember when I was in college, of course that was in the late 60s, and conspiracy theories were rampant then, I think. But I did hear in the classroom from professors that Franklin Roosevelt had known that Pearl Harbor was going to be bombed.
Exactly.
And also that Roosevelt had told Stalin to warn the Japanese that the bomb was going to be dropped in Hiroshima, and Stalin, for reasons of his own, chose not to tell the Japanese, and on and on. Of course, I lived through the Kennedy assassinations, both of them, and Martin Luther King, so there's...
Well, and college students today have been passing around links to the YouTube videos that have all kinds of conspiracy theories about the 9/11.
Yes, right.
There are tons of conspiracy theories about that. So it's been fun to tap into what all these theories are, and then to try to imagine, well, what if there was a singular entity that had been behind it all?
Right.
And so that I have a character who seems in the beginning, when you meet him, like he's a wild, crazy guy who believes all this stuff. And then by the end of the book, I want the reader to be going, could he be right? And I don't think I'll say whether he's really right or not. That'll be left for the reader to decide.
Great. Interesting, this idea of what if, because I think our students, writing students, creative writing students in particular, they come up with ideas and I say, well, what, turn that around a little bit. Say, what if something else happened? And that what if becomes really the seed for a good story, I think. It sounds like you got a great story.
I think that's where all the stories that I've written start from. The second book, Cross Current, started with a child found in a boat. And that came about because of the story of Elian. And the whole Elian Gonzalez story as it unfolded in the news. And I was teaching here in Broward County, and I had so many students of mine who were Haitian. And I kept saying to myself, what if Elian had been Haitian? How would that have played out differently? And I think we all know.
Yeah, unfortunately, the immigration policy is to send Haitians back to Haiti, and that's not very just. Let's just leave it at that. I noticed that, again, in your first novel, in Surface Tension, you talk about human trafficking, and then in Cross Currents, it's it's the Haitian issue and Haitian culture and the immigration of Haitians. And in Bitter End, I recognized the case, because I think because of the Black Mustang, that there was actually a murder. I think it's still unsolved. No, maybe I think they did solve it since then, but at the time it went unsolved for a long time. That someone who had something to do with the shipping industry or tourism was gunned down from inside a Black Mustang. So
his name was Gus Boulis.
Right.
And Gus was a really interesting character. And what was amazing to me is I started planning that book only about a year after Gus was shot. He was shot in a drive-by shooting in Fort Lauderdale.
Right.
And he owned the Sun Cruise Casino gambling boats that sailed out of Dania down by Martha's. And he was killed in this drive-by shooting where a car pulled up in front of him and it blocked him in, and another car pulled up alongside him. And he had started the Miami Subs chain before he did the Sun Cruz Casino. And when he was shot, he wasn't killed immediately. Like the cops always tell us that people die immediately on TV from gunshot wounds, and that frequently isn't the case. Well, Gus was able to drive his car down onto Federal Highway in Fort Lauderdale, and he died when he crashed into a palm tree right in front of a Miami Subs restaurant.
In front of Miami Subs?
His own restaurant that he had started. And I thought, you know, I didn't know the man, so I wasn't feeling, you know, grief at his death, but when I heard that story, I thought, oh my gosh, Carl Hyacin couldn't have written that.
Right.
You know, that scenario that this guy dies right in front of his own restaurant.
Right.
And as I started doing research into it, found out that there were mob connections and whatnot. And I didn't know that 4 years later, well actually 3 years later, when the book came out, the exact same day, I was teaching at FIU, a nighttime creative writing course. And my agent called me up and said, they're trying to reach you because the news wants to interview you because they've just made an arrest in the Gus Boulis murder case. And your book is being released today, and they know that it's based on the Gus Boulis.
Right.
And I said, well, I'm going to teach in a half an hour. And she said, oh, well, that's okay. We'll tell them you can't be interviewed. And I went, no, the news TV, you got to be kidding. So I was teaching over there. The news truck drove across town, and I went into my class, and I gave them an assignment. And I said, you all work amongst yourselves now. And I opened the door, and the guy with the camera came in, and I said, I have to go talk to ABC News. I was like, I always wanted to say that. Now, of course, I talked. The guys that they arrested were named Big Tony, Little Tony, and Pudgy.
Yeah.
Right. And so the person talks to you for 20 minutes, and they use 30 seconds of the clip.
Right.
And the 30 seconds that they used was me saying, oh, them arresting these guys, I knew that was going to happen from all the research. I knew who it was who did it. And afterwards, when I saw it on the news, I thought, oh, I'm so smart. I'm telling the mob that I know all this inside stuff.
Right.
Cement shoes someday.
Well, hopefully that's not going to happen to you. And this broadcast will be longer than 30 seconds, I can promise you. No problem there.
Right.
All right, well, great. Anything else that you would like to say to our viewing audience out here at Broward Community College and elsewhere?
It is just great having these books published at this time of my life. I am somebody who wanted to write books from the time I was a kid. And I always have made a living and done many other things and written on the side. And I've published articles, I've published short stories, but to finally have my novels published has been so much fun. It's so great to get emails from fans. I get them all the time from all over the world, literally.
Right.
And I know that there are a lot of students, a lot of people who have dreams of becoming big in music or art or anything like that. And unfortunately today, everybody thinks it's going to happen overnight. They watch Cribs and they picture themselves in these great big houses. And you don't make a lot of money necessarily at this, and it doesn't happen overnight. But when it does happen, it's worth the long wait that has happened. So stick with it. That's what I say to anybody who has dreams.
Great, good for you. Really, I think you deserve it. If you'd like to get more information about Christine Kling, you can visit her own website, www.christinekling.com, and you can look at her books and lots of gallery of friends I found was very interesting. And there are people who write in constantly to Christine, and there's a conversation going, so you might want to get in on that conversation. And of course, buy her books. Go right now and buy her books. Okay, well, that's the end of today's podcast. This is Professor Michael Minassian, podcasting from Broward Community College in Broward County, Florida, reminding you to keep your eye on literature.